Hello, welcome, dear colleagues, to our first day of the International Medical Physics Week. My name is Simone Kodlulovich Renha. I'm president of the Professional Relations Committee of IOMP. It's an honor for me to moderate this special session with Dr. Colin Orton, who will speak on leadership in medical physics. I am here with my colleague, Eva Bezak, our Vice President of IOMP. So thank you very much, everybody, to be here with us in this day. So the floor is yours, Dr. House. One moment, please, the next slide. It's difficult to summarize the curriculum of Dr. Orton. He was graduated with a Ph.D. in radiation physics from the University of London in 1966. He worked as director of medical physics at New York University School of Medicine, assistant professor during many years at Rhode Island Hospital University, and at the Detroit Medical Center, Karmanos Cancer Institute, and Wayne State University, where he is currently emeritus in the School of Medicine. While at Wayne State, he directed of one of the first accredited medical physics graduate program with over 150 master students and PhD students. His major research interests have been bioeffect dose modeling, development of new fractionation and dose rate regimes, HGR brachytherapy, cervix and breast radiotherapy, radiobiology, radiation carcinogenesis, radiation-induced injuries in radiotherapy physics, and he has taught courses in radiation biology annually to residents, therapists, and physicists. He has served as president of the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, AAPM, chairman of the American College of Medical Physics, ACMP, president of the International Organization for Medical Physics, the American Brachytherapy Society, the International Union for Physical Engineers Science in Medicine, and the International Medical Physics Certification Board. Dr. Orton has published over 20 books, over 290 papers, made over 600 presentations, and has received the major awards of AAPM, ACMP, ABS, IOMP, and IUPESM. It's impressive. Dr. Colin, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to be giving this webinar today on leadership in medical physics. But before I start, let me explain that when I was first invited to give this presentation, I was very equivocal on whether or not I'd accept it for several reasons. One is I'd never given a talk on leadership before, so this was going to be new to me. I'd have to do a lot of preparation. I knew my friends and particularly my wife were going to criticize me for accepting this. I've got lots of work to do around the garden here that isn't being done because I spent time preparing this talk. But also, more importantly, I wasn't really sure that it was worthwhile talking about leadership in medical physics. I'd seen people who had been writing papers about it over the years. I hadn't read any of them, and I wasn't really sure that we needed to talk about it until I started reading these papers. And as soon as I started reading these papers, I realized I should be doing this talk. So why are we concerned about leadership in medical physics? And the one paper that really convinced me to give this presentation was a paper that was actually about leadership in medicine, And here's a quotation from that paper on leadership in medicine. It is indisputable that to deliver high quality care consistently to patients requires, among many other factors, good medical physics leadership. You know, I put the word physics in there. This was actually a paper, as I said, on medical leadership that was published about 13 years ago. But I think it applies even more than anything to medical physics leadership. You really need medical physicist leadership to provide quality care to patients. So what do I mean by leadership in medical physics? Well, actually, I believe that all medical physicists are, in fact, leaders. And I believe that because they have the specialized knowledge and expertise. And sorry, this is getting in the way over here for some reason or other. Well, we can't get rid of it. I don't think I can move my screen over at all. So let's go back. I believe that all medical physicists are, in fact, leaders. And I believe this because they have the knowledge and expertise. They're the scientists in the department. And they lead all those they work with who do not have this knowledge and expertise to deliver optimal care to patients. I'm talking about technicians, physicians, administrators, etc. in the department. Without medical physics leadership, and all the physicists in the department are leading to deliver optimal care to the patients. But I'm not going to be talking about that kind of leadership for this talk. I'm going to be talking about, in this presentation, the next step up in leadership of fellow medical physicists. So who are these leaders? Well, in your clinical programs first, for example, obviously the chief medical physicists in the departments. They are leaders of the medical physics in their departments. And in small facilities, that's probably the only leader that you need in medical physics, because the chief medical physicist can probably handle it all. But in larger departments, and certainly in the departments that I've been chief medical physicist in, I've been able to delegate leadership to other people, other medical physicists. For instance, I've been able to delegate somebody to be the chief clinical physicist. And in my last work in Wayne State University, I was very smart. I selected somebody to be the chief clinical physicist who didn't need any supervision from me, who could handle it perfectly well. And this was the person who handled all of the work on the machines and the treatment planning and so on, and did a wonderful job. I also like to delegate other responsibilities for several other reasons. Obviously, I couldn't handle it all myself. It's a big department. But more importantly, I wanted to give other members of the physics group the opportunity to be a leader. So eventually, they would probably become chief medical physicist in their own institution. In fact, pretty much everybody that I assigned these kind of duties to became a chief medical physicist in their own department eventually. Educational program directors. Actually, in my department, I took that role. I was chief medical physicist, and I ran the educational programs, which are the master's and the PhD programs. But in some departments, this might be assigned to other leaders. Trainee residency program directors. We had a residency program for medical physicists, and I assigned somebody to run that program for me because I knew I wouldn't have time to do that. Research leaders, I guess I was probably the research leader. I didn't assign anybody else to do that in my department. But again, in a really busy department, you want somebody to be leading the research, maybe applying for grants and so on to do that research. And then radiation safety officer, somebody to handle the radiation safety. I was fortunate in my department that another department, the imaging department, were the providing a radiation safety officer for the institution. Well, what about outside, leaders outside of the clinical facility? What do I mean by that? Well, chairs of committees, task groups, working groups, etc., officers in medical physics organizations. These are the leaders of other medical physicists outside of individual clinical departments. And these can be local or regional medical physics organizations. It might be a chapter of your medical physics organization, for instance. It might be national. It might be your national organization. It might even be international, like the IOMP. Or maybe you have a consultancy business and you're providing medical physicists to a variety of different clinical facilities. So that would be a leader of medical physicists. Editors of medical physics newsletters and journals. These are leaders of other medical physicists. The journal would be research and newsletters would be information for members. And then something you might not have thought of, but I've been involved in that, members of national clinical trial study groups. Without medical physicists being involved and being leaders in these clinical study groups, the work wouldn't get done. So we need members of medical physicists to work in clinical trial study groups. And these are just a few of the ideas I have about leadership outside of your clinical facility. So the next question I'm sure you're going to ask is, can anybody become a leader? And my answer there is absolutely no. Not anybody could become a leader. Lots of people don't have the ability to become a leader. On the other hand, I do believe that any medical physicist can become a leader. Why do I believe this? I believe this because the mere fact that they have led themselves through all the difficulties they have faced in order to achieve their goal of becoming a qualified medical physicist means to me that they have demonstrated they can become leaders of others. They've led their own career up to this point. Clearly, they can lead others at this point. So all medical physicists, I think, can become leaders. So why do many medical physicists never become leaders? And I think there are several reasons for that. One, you could argue lack of opportunity, but I don't really believe this. I don't believe it because opportunities are always there if you make the effort to seek them. Lack of commitment, I think, is probably more important. Leadership takes extra work, and you may not be willing to sacrifice any of your spare time at the expense of time spent with family, research, hobbies, etc. And I think this is probably the main reason why many medical physicists don't want to become leaders. They might have it thrust upon them, and I'll talk about that a bit later on, but quite a lot of people just want to spend, they don't want to work late in the evening doing things that extra work because they're leaders. They want to get home and work with their family. A lot of people in research really don't want to be leaders. They want to get on with their research, apply for grants and so on. Of course, in a way, they're leaders of research, hobbies, etc. These people are just as happy working for others to assure the best care of their patients. Then why do many, maybe most medical physicists want to become leaders? And I think one of the most important is self-satisfaction. I'm sure this applies to me. In the past, I've always been satisfied that I'm doing my best. I'm more important, here we go. You want to go as far as you can in your career. I remember sitting down one time and saying that to myself. I'd like to go as far as I can in my career, and I'll be fully satisfied that I've done my best. You want to feel that you're helping other medical physicists achieve their goals. For instance, in education, I feel very satisfied if I can help other medical physicists achieve their goals, become certified, etc. The power and the glory of being a leader. You yearn to control others. You want others to think that you are important. And I hope this isn't you. I have known leaders of departments do it for the power and the glory. They want to control others, and they want other people to think they're important. But I don't think I know of any medical physicists like that. I do know of some physicians who clearly have been chairman of a department because they want the power and the glory of being the chair. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on when I talk about leadership styles. But I hope this isn't you. Financial advancement, no problem with that at all. Leaders are usually better compensated. So you're appointed to be, for instance, the chief medical physicist. It's likely that they're going to pay you more for doing the extra work and spending the extra time doing that. So how can you become a leader? First of all, in your professional organization, you need to take advantage of opportunities. I've often had new AAPM members come up to me at an AAPM annual meeting and ask me this exact question: how can I get involved in my professional organization? And I've given them advice, and before you know it, they're chairing a working group or a task group or even a committee of the AAPM. It's happened many times to me. People really want to get involved, and I tell them, first of all, you've got to make the commitment. Don't do this unless you're committed. And I tell them to attend committee meetings, go up to the chair and ask if you can come involved, if you can become a member of that committee. Ask any officers, and that's what they were doing with me when I was an officer in AAPM. They would come to me and ask me if there were any openings. And in larger societies like the AAPM, volunteer to fill vacancies. The AAPM actually in the past year or so have started what they call committee classified ads, where every month a message goes out to all the members that there are openings on various committees, and please apply for these if you're willing to do them. So bigger societies can do this. Otherwise, you can go and talk to officers and so on about filling vacancies. So volunteer to take these opportunities. And work is very similar to that. Volunteer to take on specific responsibilities at work. Go to your chief physicist and ask, is there any teaching I can do? I can give lectures. Maybe you can assign me to give a complete course or run a teaching or residency program. So you become a leader in teaching by volunteering to do it in your department. Take some of the work away from somebody who's maybe very busy doing this teaching. Research, organize a research discussion group, for example, lead a specific research project. Clinically, offer to lead a specialized program like the brachytherapy program, maybe in vivo dosimetry, portal imaging, CT, MRI, ultrasound, treatment planning, etc. Volunteer to do any of these, and you'll become a leader in, for instance, in vivo dosimetry for your department. Radiation safety, I mentioned radiation safety before. You can volunteer to take over radiation safety in the department. Now, do you need to have special traits? What special traits do I think a leader should have? And most importantly, commitment. I did mention that before. Don't even think about becoming a leader if you're not willing to put in the extra time and effort. Enthusiasm. I think you should be enthusiastic to be a leader. You should want to be a leader. Clear-sighted, you should have clear vision of what you are going to do when you are a leader, how you're going to lead your colleagues, if it's a leadership role with colleagues, and maybe a leadership role in your department, and where you're going to lead them. So that's your strategic plan. So I think you should have a leadership style in mind, and I'll talk about that later on. And I think you should have a strategic plan on where you're going to lead these people. Now, what special traits do others think leaders should have? We can actually answer that question, because this was a question posed to the audience at the 2016 AAPM Summer School on Medical Physics Leadership Academy. And I'll come back to that quite a bit later on. There was a summer school on medical physics leadership. That question was posed. What do you think leaders should have as a special trait? And in order of importance, these were adaptability. A leader should be adaptable. A leader should be visionary. A leader should be trustworthy. A leader should be collaborative. And a leader should be ethically minded. All these are really important. They weren't the top three that I would have chosen, but they're the 5 top traits that other medical physicists would like to see in their leader. What about skills? What special skills should a leader have or should develop when they're appointed to be a leader? In my opinion, most, but not necessarily all of the following. Decision-making, clearly very important in a leader. Communication, problem-solving, conflict management, and program and people management, financial management. You don't need all of these necessarily because maybe you have somebody else that deals with the financial management of the department. But it's good to have some knowledge of financial management if you can. Administration, again, you may have an administrator that will handle most of the administration of the medical physics group. But it's good if you know something about administration. Which of these skills you have depends on your leadership style, and I'll talk about leadership style later on again. Are you going to assign part of this to other people, other medical physicists or other administrators in your department? Well, what sources are available, or maybe should be available, to learn these leadership skills? Attending supplementary courses outside your medical physics graduate program. So you're in a graduate program, you're studying to be a medical physicist, you may be in a master's or a PhD program. There are courses in other departments, for instance, courses in accounting, courses in management, maybe even courses in leadership in other departments. And you could do that. I've never really encouraged that, but I know some people who have done that and they've learned special skills that I certainly didn't have. Attending sessions offered at your association meetings, such as the AAPM Summer School that I already mentioned, and at the AAPM annual meeting, we have sessions on leadership and different aspects of leadership at that meeting. Attend those sessions and you'll pick up some skills that you maybe need to be a good leader of medical physics. Attend or later viewing webinars on leadership topics like this one, and I'll talk about another one later on that the American Institute of Physics have produced on leadership, a webinar that you can go and take a look at. And of course, you can take a look at this one. And maybe as part of your graduate medical physics degree program. I know a lot of people argue that in our graduate medical physics degree program, we ought to have some lectures, maybe even an entire course on leadership. That's controversial. And in fact, a while ago, I personally ran as moderator in the journal Medical Physics about 6 years ago, a point-counterpoint debate on exactly this topic. And Carmel, Caruana, and Adam Kuno argued for and against having this as part of the medical physics curriculum. According to Carmel Caruana, who was arguing for the proposition that we should have this in our graduate programs, there's a statement from his presentation: training for the real world requires a program to build up the psychology of our trainees and turn them into strong leaders. It's imperative that we introduce elements of strategic planning, medical sociology, management, leadership, economics, communication, office politics, and policy making into our curricula. In other words, he's proposing a full course on leadership. According to his opponent, Adam Kuno, While strategic planning and management may be beneficial skills for medical physicists, why should we teach these skills when there will be ample opportunities to acquire them after graduation as may be needed? Constantly advancing technology already causes a struggle to cover an expanded core of basic knowledge, and in a choice between teaching new technologies or teaching management skills, I choose physics every time. So you can see there are good arguments for and against having this as part of your graduate program. So how can we best learn leadership if we haven't learned it already in our graduate program? Take advantage of existing programs designed to teach leadership for medical physics. And this, I'm going to talk about each of these separately, but Kwan Hun Ung from Malaysia, who may be attending this presentation today, has a mentorship program. I'll talk about that. AAPM has this leadership academy that I mentioned, and you can take advantage of some of that, not maybe all of it, and I'll talk about that. AAPM mentorship program, this is actually open only for AAPM members. AAPM video interviews of medical physics leaders. You can learn leadership from the leaders themselves, and I'll talk about that. IOMP and IUPESM have leadership modules, and I'll speak a little bit about that. And then you can read articles and books about leadership in medical physics journals. And of course, I mentioned webinars before. You can learn about leadership from webinars. Let's look at Kwan Hun Ung's mentorship program. It was founded in 2016, and here's a good article that you might want to read. It's published in the IOMP journal, Medical Physics International, about 3 years ago. And this was nurturing a global initiative in medical physics leadership and mentoring. And notice the last four authors here: Eva Bezak, Robert Gerard, Thomas Crom, and Kwan Ung. They're the last four authors. They were actually the originators of the initial team that developed this several years ago. And you don't need to read all this, but they were the initial leaders. And what were the objectives of this mentorship program? The objectives of the program are to develop leadership roles among young medical physicists, provide guidance and support for young medical physicists. And how does this done? Mentors meet with young medical physicists either electronically via teleconferences, for instance, Zoom, like this meeting, or physically at meetings where medical physicists are gathering. And they've had several of these gatherings of medical physicists. They will go there and meet their mentors personally. So mentorship's either by, for instance, Zoom, or mentoring by meeting the individuals personally. AAPM Leadership Academy, here's the Leadership Academy homepage on the AAPM website, and you can see that this was developed in 2014, and the big thing that they did initially was to have this entire summer school devoted to leadership. So let's talk about this Leadership Academy. They have a curriculum, and the curriculum is threefold. They have a curriculum on personal and interpersonal skills, development of professional and developmental skills, executive and administrative skills. And let me go over those quickly. Core for personal and interpersonal curriculum, all of the things that you would want to hope that you would find in individuals. And each of these topics has been addressed or will be addressed once a month in a Zoom meeting. So there'll be a Zoom meeting, or has been a Zoom meeting, on emotional self-awareness and so on. And this goes on empathy, influence, adaptability, all the important things that you would want as personal and interpersonal skills in leaders. So this is a very extensive program. Complementary to this would be accurate self-assessment, self-confidence, and so on. Achievement, optimism, developing others, inspirational leadership, and a change catalyst. Let's look at now professional and developmental curriculum, developing these skills. The core skills would be delegation skills and time management skills, communication skills, professional vitality, and new venture leadership. Complementary to that would be responsible behavior, ethical behavior. As I say, each month there'll be a Zoom meeting about these specific topics, and respect for diversity, interpersonal and problem-solving skills. And then executive and administrative skills, core would be operations, and I'll talk about that on my next slide just to show you how it's done, how the Zoom meetings are operated. For instance, there's been one on operation skills. Finance, informational resources, human resources, and strategic planning and external affairs. And then complementary to that would be knowledge of medical physics outside of your specific specialty. So let's look at this one, operations now. How was this done? This was done through what they call the Leadership Club. As an AAPM member, you join the Leadership Club and you have these monthly Zoom meetings. And here's the one they had on operations. There were actually 4 presentations in this 1 hour long Zoom meeting. Unfortunately, these are only open to AAPM members, but the reason I'm showing it to you is that maybe your national society or maybe even the IOMP could operate something like a leadership club just like this. But here's something you can look at from the Leadership Club that dealt with many of those matters that I've just been talking about. And this was the summer school that was offered in 2016. And these are some of the topics that were presented at that summer school. From vision to leadership, leadership in action, leadership styles, team effectiveness, project management, financial accounting, written, oral, and visual communication, leadership in the context of academics, and finally, leadership in entrepreneurship and consulting, forming a consulting business. Now, can you actually see these? Yes, they can. They're all actually open access. And the way you do it is you go into the AAPM website, aapm.org, and you look for meetings and click on meetings, and look for school. This was the summer school. And then look for 2016, and you'll see 2016 virtual library presentations. Click on that, and you'll be able to look at all. There were about 15 or so presentations on these particular topics, sometimes 2 or 3 different speakers on one topic. So this can be done. And then taking leadership to the next level. The mentorship program is only open to AAPM members. It's the program designed to support the success of physicist members of the AAPM. While it's expected that many participants seeking mentorship will be early career physicists, the program is not limited to new professionals. Welcome students, trainees, mid and late career physicist participants. For example, mid-career physicists may find value in the program for developing a plan for promotion or increased managerial roles, while most more experienced medical physicists may seek mentorship in leadership skills. So that's the AAPM mentorship program. That's very similar to the Kwan Hun Un global mentorship program that I mentioned before. I mentioned these video interviews. There have been about 150 video interviews of prominent medical physicists who have played leading roles in the development of our field, and they're each about 40 minutes long. And I would encourage you to go and look at some of these if you're interested in finding out how some of these leaders became leaders. And they describe this, and I know I've interviewed several of these prominent medical physicists, and one thing I always ask them is, how did you manage to get into becoming a leader in medical physics? And these are all available open access on the AAPM Virtual Museum of Medical Physics, museum.aapm.org. And you go in there and you click on the gallery. It's called a gallery of video interviews. There are many other galleries on the Virtue Museum you may be interested in. It's really a history museum of medical physics, and it's under development. It hasn't been completed. Probably about half of the galleries have been completed so far, and many others are being worked on as we speak. So please go in there and have a look at some of these video interviews and see how other people develop becoming a medical physicist leader. EFOM, PU temp modules I mentioned. Here's one. This was a module developed by Carmel, Caruana for diagnostic and interventional radiological physicists. But I'm sure the EFOM PU temp modules will be developed for other medical physics specialties. And this is what you see when you go to that link that was on the previous page. This is the page you'll get to. And what you need to do is go down here and click on here, see this module's presentation, and you'll see a presentation by Carmel Caruana introducing this module, and you'll see his slides on why it's important to have leadership presentations like these webinars. You can actually access the original webinars of this school. This was a complete school and other schools by joining the EFOM learning platform. To view the associated webinar on this and other topics, you need to become an individual associate member of EFOM. And you can register for this, and here's the link to that registration. And it's going to cost you, it costs you about, I think it's €15 a year currently to view all these e-learning opportunities, these webinars. They also have a book on medical physics leadership, which I think would be good to view. I haven't read this book, but my colleague Carmel Caruana has written the book, and this is on leadership and challenges in medical physics, a strategic and robust approach. This is an EFOM network book. And then I mentioned before an AIP, American Institute of Physics webinar. This I think you'll find very interesting if you're interested in learning about leadership in medical physics. It's called If You Lead, Will They Follow? And it's presented by Lisa Balbis. And the subtitle of this is Leadership Skills, a Critical Tool for Career Success. Some statements from this that I picked out when I watched this. Without leadership, nothing gets done. Really believe that's true, of course. This presentation discusses various aspects of leadership and how they affect your career. The discussion includes why leadership skills are essential for success and specific things you can do to develop your own leadership skills. And it's specifically and it can be viewed on YouTube. You can go to this YouTube. What I did was I went to YouTube and typed in the title, If You Lead, Will They Follow? And I got to it. Or you can click on this link. The topics included in this webinar is what is leadership, long-term success, vision, motivating others, assigned or earned leadership. And I like these two statements. A title doesn't make you a leader. So just because you're called a chief medical physicist doesn't really make you a good leader. I should probably put the word good in there. Lack of a title doesn't necessarily make you not a leader. You can be a good leader, but you don't actually have the title. And I like those two statements. And then it talks about leadership skills, leadership styles, and it defines 5 leadership styles. They're not necessarily the styles I would have chosen: authoritative, democratic, laissez-faire, paternalistic, and servant. But I'd like to go over each of these because they're pretty good definitions of leadership styles. So let's look at the first two, authoritative and democratic. Authoritative, and this is the dictator. This is the person who's looking for the power and the glory that I mentioned before. And this person would make all the decisions in your facility, and of course make the decisions rapidly. I don't know any medical physicist who operates this way, but I've known 2 physicians who have been chairs of departments who have run this way, and they make all the decisions. The physicist never gets involved, and they decide on the equipment and so on without even consulting the physics staff. I was actually a member of that staff one time, and I left pretty soon after we got that chairperson. And I should say that chairperson was eventually fired because they were actually bad decision makers and made a lot of bad decisions. I know another department where that happened, and all the physics staff pretty much, maybe only one stayed, and all the rest left because they couldn't handle it. And he was also fired shortly after being appointed. Democratic, on the other hand, I think I would put myself in that class, just the opposite to authoritative. You share the responsibilities, you allow other people to make decisions, and it promotes the interests of the entire group. I think that's really an important way to run a medical physics department, or other things, maybe a committee in your national society. You share responsibility, you have task groups and working groups and so on, and let them make the decisions. Laissez-faire and paternalism. Laissez-faire is often stated as a way of leading a group, and here the subordinates make all the decisions. You don't actually make any decisions at all. They are empowered to implement them. You better be careful to select the right subordinates. You're essentially administrator of a group, and they make all the decisions and they implement their decisions. Paternalism, a different kind of leadership style. You're the leader and everybody follows you. You may be a very experienced leader and you've got a lot of young people who are coming in that are going to follow you, and you're acting as, I guess I should also allow this could be called maternalism. If you're a woman leading the department, and you lead them and you advise them on their professional and their personal issues, you're a leader that really acts as their mentor. So this could be called mentorship leadership. And then finally, what is called servant leadership in this AIP presentation. The goal of the leader is to serve. I think of this as the kind of person that was a member of the medical physics group and served the leader of that group, the chief medical physicist. The chief medical physicist leaves, and the chairman of the department comes to you and says, I want to appoint you as the leader of the department. You don't really want this position. You're very happy to continue on with doing the way things have been going. And you accept the leadership role for two reasons. One is that somebody's got to do it, might as well be you, and rather than call somebody else in from outside. And secondly, you're probably going to get a raise for doing this. You share the power. You do all the work that you were doing before, and you share the power with all the other physicists that were doing work before. The followers are first, and you help them to develop. Your service is to something bigger. You're serving the department, and you're serving the patients, and you're serving your fellow colleagues. So that would be servant leadership. So let me summarize my talk. I'm getting near the end now. In my opinion, any medical physicist can become a leader. But you must be committed to put in the extra time and effort if you take on a leadership role. You should take advantage of opportunities if you want to become a leader. There are numerous sources of information on how to be a leader, and by the way, how to become a leader, as we talked about in this webinar earlier. And without leadership, I quote, without leadership, nothing gets done. So thank you all for participating in this webinar. I hope you've found it useful, and may you all succeed in your leadership dreams and aspirations.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. Can I ask you one question? What are some common challenges that medical physics leaders face, and how can they navigate, how they can address them successfully?
Well, I can talk from my personal experience. And I mentioned chairman of a department. I had a big challenge. I had a chairman of a department who I just couldn't work with. I mean, it was very nice person when I first started working with him. He was actually one of my previous residents who I taught about 20 years before. He invited me to come and offered me a nice increase in salary and increase in my faculty appointment. Very nice man, but I think he was very insecure. And he ran the department like a dictator, and he just wouldn't allow anybody else to make decisions. And he wouldn't allow anybody else to take over chairmanship of the department, even though it was a requirement that he step down after 6 years. And he'd been 6 years, but he wouldn't allow anybody to take over. He did it very easily. He ran a meeting to select somebody else to chair the group, the department. And he told everybody, if you voted against him, he would reduce your salary. He actually said that. He didn't last very long, by the way. As soon as I left, he lasted maybe another year and then was fired. Because when I left, I was invited by the president of the hospital to a meeting, and it lasted over an hour, where I described all the problems, and he didn't last very long after that. Another department I worked in, a new physician was coming in to chair the department, and I'd heard through the grapevine in his previous work that he had been a problem for medical physicists, so I left. And I retired. I hadn't intended to retire, and I retired. And within a year, all but one of the medical physics staff had left. And after a couple of years, he was fired. It just didn't work. He was the dictator. So that's the kind of problems that you have and you have to deal with. I was never trained in how to deal with those problems. I dealt with them by leaving. I had other jobs to go to. Other people offered me work, and I could retire at the end, so I retired. And by the way, I wasn't really retired because I was still editing the journal Medical Physics, and they were paying me to edit the journal. So I still had work to do, but I could do it at home. So I don't know. I can't really give a better answer than how I handle.
Editors are also leaders. Yeah, it's true that all leaders and medical physics leaders.
John,
yeah, okay. Thank you, Simone. So please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Can you please?
Okay. Yes, we have some questions here. One of them is, Dr. Colin, if you have to choose only two main qualities for a leadership medical physicist, which two qualities would you pick?
Which qualities would I pick in selecting a medical physicist? Is that the question?
The quality that for a leadership.
Oh, qualities for leadership.
Yeah.
I would think the most important one is dedication, that you're willing to put in the extra effort and time. And I would explain to if I'm interviewing a candidate, for chairing a committee, for instance, I would make sure that they were committed to put in the extra time and effort. Obviously, that they understand the topic. If it's a committee, have they been involved before? Do they have have they worked in other committees and have they been active? A lot of people will offer to do things that they're just doing it for the grandeur of being named a chairman of a committee, for instance. I don't think that happens very often, but I know it can happen. And people would take on the responsibility and then won't do the work.
Yeah, it's difficult to choose just two.
I look for dedication more than anything.
Okay, a commitment, yeah. Another question. You say that all medical physicists make good leaders. Do they all make good managers? Should they?
I didn't say they all make good. I didn't say they make good leaders, but they certainly should be able to make leaders, and hopefully they would be good leaders. Managers, I've never been involved in appointing a manager. Are you talking about manager of a medical physics group or manager of a department? I'm not sure.
So you say that the medical physicist can do it, with the experience, can make a good leaders.
Yeah, I think that some chief medical physicists pretty much act as managers. They don't do much else. They manage. There's a lot of work to do in a big department, and they manage the group. Personally, I've always had an administrative manager who wasn't a medical physicist managing things for me, because I didn't have the management skills. I was never trained to be a manager, and we did have a very good manager in our department who could handle all those managerial affairs, the financial affairs, and so on.
Okay. According to your experience as a leader, what strategy would work best to manage conflict within a team of medical physicists? So, difficult questions.
Yeah, I think you need to be able to personally work with the individuals in your department. So, and it's important, if you selected those people because you've been the chief medical physicist for some time, and I would only choose people I could really work with. I felt personally that I could be friends with. I've always felt like I wanted to be friends with my staff, and I've always felt that way, and I think they've always felt that way with me. But sometimes you don't choose these people. Sometimes you come in as the chief medical physicist and you haven't chosen the people that you're going to be working with. Then it's more difficult. I try to be friends with them, and sometimes that's not easy. They're not very friendly people. They might be very competent and do a good job. Sometimes they're not so confident and don't do such a good job. And I've occasionally encouraged people to go somewhere else. I've never fired anybody, but I've told people, you'd be better off working in your own department. Why don't you get a chief medical physics job somewhere else? And that's very rarely has that happen. But that's somebody who maybe I've inherited when I've come into a department.
Well, Eva, we have a lot of questions, but I think that we do not have time. Can we just do one more?
Yes, please.
The lack of leadership in medical physics adversely affects the medical physics profession compared to other healthcare professionals in majority of the countries. Do you think that current education and training programs can address future challenges?
Well, fortunately, we have organizations like the IOMP that have lots of educational programs, nowadays, lots of webinars on a whole variety of different problems, like technical problems, scientific meetings, and so on. So I think that's an opportunity everybody should take advantage of. And organizations do have schools, like in IFOMP, you have schools, in AAPM we have schools, and I'm sure in many of the other organizations we have schools that people can attend. Thank heavens for Zoom. With Zoom meetings now, a lot of education can be done that couldn't have been done before we had Zoom. And it's one thing that the COVID crisis has helped us with. It didn't help us with very much, but it's helped us with Zoom meetings. We've learned that Zoom meetings are really important, and a lot of people will attend Zoom meetings if we offer them.
Okay.
Is it possible to
Yes.
answer the questions after the meeting? There are some questions that we don't have time.
Yes, anybody
Yes,
feel
Simone.
free to email me, Ibrahim. Feel free.
Yes, good morning. Good
Ibrahim's
morning,
one of
Colin.
my very successful candidates in the past. He's risen to the top of leadership, and I hope I taught you well, Ibrahim.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good morning. First of all, thank you very much for this topic. I know this is the first time you speak about leadership, because you experience leadership from the way you taught us. And I remember the first class I took with you, radiation biology. You told us this saying, and I wrote it in my article. I wrote an article about leadership in medical physics 2 years ago, and you can search on it's in health physics. So you taught us not only medical physics stuff, but you taught us how to be leaders, and you did this in a very good way. And this is the leaders that have a full confidence to make others leaders. Some other leaders, they don't want to give the opportunity for others to become leaders. Why? Because they have less self-confidence. These leaders are not so good leaders. But those leaders who give opportunities for others and teach them how to become leader is the most leadership, aspects that you have given to us. And I know that many of your students now are leaders in the field, and they are, I'm going through your footstep, and I'm trying to help other colleagues, physicists from around the world, to become leaders themselves, because this will give us more satisfaction as you got that satisfaction. Now you're playing golf, and very happy that many of your students are, spreading these seeds of leadership around the world. Thank you very much, Colin, and you are really a good leader. Thank you.
Eva, they are asking to share the email of Dr. Colin here in the chat. Could you please?
I think it's up to Colin whether he wants to share his email or not.
We can barely hear you, Eva.
Yeah, Eva says that it is up to Colin. Colin, would you like to share, IOMP, to share your email address with our audience?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll type it in right now.
Thank
That's
you.
the leadership.
Yeah, because there are many questions yet. Okay, I would like to thank you, Dr. Colin. It was was outstanding presentation. I liked it very much. Thank you, John, to organize this medical physics week. And thank you, Eva and Madalena, to help us to organize this section.
And
Thank you all.
Thank you, Simone. Eva and I, we coordinated and we co-organized this event. This week, the webinars of this week, okay?
Okay.
To be fair.
So thank you thank you very much, all of you that spend your time and learn a lot with Dr. Colin today. And don't forget, tomorrow we have much more. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.